Hi there. Welcome to Intro to Music, Music 101. I'm Dr. Curtin. I'm glad to have you in my class. I'm sorry the class could not be face-to-face in person, which is how I usually teach this class and how I much prefer to teach it, but we've all had to deal with some strange circumstances over the last year. As I say in the email that I sent you and in the announcement that I put up on D2L, I'm going to try and keep this class as much like my regular face-to-face class as possible, which means it's going to be a series of lectures, which you're going to see here on YouTube. There's going to be reading assignments. There's going to be listening assignments. I'm going to talk about how to access those. There might be additional supplemental things that I put in the announcement section here on D2L, but that's pretty much it. I don't make PowerPoint presentations and that kind of thing. Now, in some ways, though, since we are having to teach this class online, I want to have the benefits of an online class, which it seems to me the main benefit of an online class is flexibility, right? You can log on and do stuff at your own pace within reason, as long as you accomplish what needs to be done in time for the next test. And in this class, by the way, the tests are going to happen roughly every 3 weeks, depending on the unit. There are 5 different units, and since the semester is about 15 or 16 weeks long, that comes out to about a test every 3 weeks or so. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself. I'll get to all that in a little while. So since we are in an online format, it didn't make any sense to me to have Zoom meetings where we all, get up and do the Brady Bunch thing or the screens with the little faces. Because for one thing, in my regular in-person class, and I think I've already mentioned this, I do not take attendance. Attendance does not count directly towards your grade. Now, it certainly counts indirectly insofar as if you come to class, you will have a better grasp of the material, you'll hear the lectures, you'll be more up on when the next test is. So in that way, certainly coming to class helps you. But I don't reward people just for coming to class, nor do I punish them just for not coming to class. For one thing, I feel like you guys are adults now, and you don't work for me. Actually, I work for you, and therefore I'm not your boss. I don't need to see that you've punched your card or whatever, and I would rather you handle that on your own. In fact, this is sort of like a big part of my own little educational philosophy. I think that learners, especially here at the college level, is what's fundamentally different about K through 12 versus college. K through 12, you are forced to be there. College, you are attending of your own free will, and you're an adult. Legally, you're an adult. So that makes all the difference in the world to me. I treat you as an adult, and the burden is not on me to make sure that you come to class. There are no truant officers. I'm not going to knock on your door at the dorm, make sure you've shown up or not. I can't be bothered with any of that. I think it's counterproductive, actually. So since I don't take attendance in my regular face-to-face class, there's no point taking attendance, seeing if everyone has logged on to a Zoom meeting. And so I'm just not doing that. Instead, you're going to access the lectures via YouTube, and you will access also the listening examples, which are also embedded in the text. The very same listening examples which are embedded in the text will be available for you to watch for free on YouTube. That's the nice thing about a class on quote-unquote classical music. Just about everything in the classical repertoire is recorded and is available free on YouTube. So although you do have to buy a book, you don't have to buy any recordings. And also you could buy a used version of the book, which does not include the the recordings that come with the book and still access all that stuff. Again, I'm getting ahead of myself. I'll get to talking about the book in a minute. So that's the first thing I want to say. Class format, lectures, the announcements section of D2L, and you'll also obviously access your tests on D2L, and stuff on YouTube and the book. Okay, so I have the syllabus here, which hopefully by now you've gotten via email or via the announcements section on D2L. And just like I would in my regular class, I always spend the first class going over the syllabus and also talking a little bit more informally about how the class works. So all my information is up there, my email. Feel free to email me anytime. I'm very quick about responding to emails, and I actually like to get emails from students. I like to answer your questions. Don't feel shy or inhibited in the least. You can consider my office hours pretty much anytime. So, for example, if you want to email me, and we could set up a Zoom thing if you'd rather talk face to face, or we can work out anything. Whatever you want best, we can work it out, and we're flexible, right? I don't have to have certain office hours. My office hours are anytime. My schedule is pretty flexible. So take advantage of that. Same thing with your other professors, by the way. Take advantage of office hours. We are here to help you. We work for you, and it's our job to help you understand. And if that means, using up all of your professors' 5 required office hours per week just for you, go ahead and do that. You're entitled to that. Okay, the required text is this. Here's the physical copy anyway. It's the 9th brief edition of Music and Appreciation by Roger Kamian. Make sure you get the brief edition, which is the paperback, and maybe you'll get it online, but there's also a non-brief edition, which is the hardcover, which is much bigger and has more stuff in it and is more expensive. You don't need that. Now, again, I think I said this in the announcement on D2L, but you don't necessarily need to have the 9th brief edition. If it saves you some money, you could get the 8th brief edition or the 7th brief edition, because they're all almost identical to each other. The only thing that changes from one edition to the next is the picture on the cover might be a little different. The page numbers might be off by 1 or 2. Some of the musical examples which they cite might have been changed, very few of them, from one edition to the next. But otherwise, it's all the same. The basic material has not changed, right? Because it's the same stuff, Beethoven was born in 1770 and died in 1827. That is never going to change. That's stuff that happened in the past. They're not going to make some new discovery on that, I don't think. So, as long as you get, say, the 7th, 8th, 9th brief edition, you'll be fine. But when I refer to page numbers, when I assign reading, I am going to be assigning pages based on this latest edition. If you have a different edition, your page numbers might be off by a page or 2, but I'm sure we can handle that. Okay, so that's the textbook, and if you have not gotten it yet, if you're worried about, well, wait a minute, I am not going to be able to get it until a few days into class, don't worry too much about it. We're going to go kind of slow for the first week or so. Now, after that, it's going to go, more quickly. But I make allowances for the fact that not everybody's going to be able to get the textbook. When you do get the textbook, though, just start reading it. Start reading, and I'm not going to assign specific pages now. Just start reading at the beginning at your own pace. For a little while, the lecture might run ahead or might even run behind the book anyway. There is one thing that I'm going to ask you to do, and I'm going to ask you to do this now in case I forget later. And that is, I want you to, before you even read the book, let's say, before you start reading the textbook, I want you to do one thing, and that is come up with a definition of the word music, like a dictionary definition. Think up that definition and email it to me. at dcurtin@lockhaven.edu so that I know that you've gotten this message. All right, this is it's not something I'm going to grade. I'm not going to give you points. It's just a sort of a fun activity. And the idea of it is, first of all, coming up with definitions of terms is a good just sort of starting point for learning anything. Right? And if we're going to be learning about music, what better way to start than to come up with a definition of the word music? But second, and maybe more important, it's these words that we already know, which actually are harder to define. And it's very good sort of mental exercise, intellectual exercise, to try and define terms which you already know and which you've known your whole life and which you maybe take for granted. Those are the ones that are more difficult to define. And here's why. A good dictionary definition includes everything which is necessary to define the thing, but nothing that is extraneous or nothing that especially is additional, which might describe some types of the thing, but not other types, and thus invalidate the definition. So, for example, if I had to define a car, well, we all know what a car is. We've seen cars our whole life. A car is a form of transportation which has four wheels. And, oh, wait a minute, have there been cars with other than four wheels? Well, there have been, actually. There's some three-wheeled cars, and, there might have been 5 or 6-wheeled cars. I don't know. So we can't specify the number of wheels exactly because that might, we have to find some way around that. Maybe a wheeled vehicle which has an engine. Well, do all cars have engines? Some cars have electric motors. And what's the definition of a motor versus an engine? That's a whole other area we may or may not get into. The point is, it's not so easy to define something like a car. And if you think that's hard, try defining music. Try defining love. Try defining justice or peace or order. These concepts which seem simple and seem like they wouldn't need to be defined, but whole books could be written defining such things. So come up with your own definition of music as brief and yet complete as you can make it, and send it to me, and maybe we'll have a little discussion on that. And that's really where we'll begin the actual course material in the next lecture. In this lecture, it's going to be about how the course is set up, what to expect taking this class, because I'd rather you know as much up front about how the class works than maybe be rudely surprised later. So, course description, class policies, and student responsibilities. The purposes of this course are, number 1, to develop an understanding of the basic elements of music. That's number 1. And this is really basically what we're going to do mostly in the first unit. Our first test is going to be on basic elements of music. Stuff like pitch, dynamics, tempo, rhythm, melody, harmony, meter, the different instruments of the Western orchestra anyway, stuff like that. And then number 2, to provide an overview of Western art music from the medieval through the Romantic eras and the historical, philosophical, and aesthetic context within which this music was composed. All right, so let's unpack that sentence. To provide an overview of Western art music. What do we mean by that? Well, we basically mean what you would consider classical music. This course is going to be mostly about classical music. And that's just because, for a couple of reasons, we have to limit ourselves somehow. The subject of music is way, way too big to cover. Even the subject of classical Western art music, Western classical music, is way too big to cover in a semester. We certainly can't cover all of music in a semester. Can't even scratch the surface. There's just too many different kinds, too many different genres of music. Even here within the West, what we mean by Western is, European American, as opposed to, let's say, the indigenous music of Asia or Australia or Africa or Native American music. So when we talk about the West, we're talking about, Eurocentric music, let's say, for lack of a better term. And that's what we mean by Western art music. The art part is basically in contrast to, let's say, popular music, or what we would call commercial music, product music, okay? Now, there's sort of a spectrum. It's not like there's a clear-cut division. There's music that's art over here, and there's music that's just like commercial pop stuff over there. There's a very wide spectrum, and we could debate what's popular versus what's art. Certainly lots of composers that we think of as classical composers were popular in their own time, wanted to be popular, wrote in such a way as to appeal to the broadest audience that they could. So these distinctions, as we'll see, so many of these kind of distinctions or categories that we come up with, especially genres of music, which are kind of artificial, or these different eras that we look at. Like we got the medieval era over here, the Renaissance here, the Baroque, the classical, the Romantic. These are all kind of artificial categories that we impose on a bunch of material to try and break it down, organize it, make it easier to understand, make it easier to teach. If we can generalize about a certain segment of this music and say, okay, this fits into that bin, and this fits into that bin, like the different bins in a record store or a CD store, right? And especially in music, there's this need to categorize, to know what genre. Like, is it pop or is it rock? Is it country and western or is it bluegrass? Is it jazz or is it blues? Is it soul or is it hip hop? Is it indie or is it roots? Or is it something else? There are just categories upon categories, right? So the category we're going to be looking at is mostly what you would consider classical, but it is a kind of a misleading term. That's why, at least for purposes of this syllabus, I use the term Western art music. Because what you think of, or what you might see in a record store bin as the classical section, is actually much, much broader than any other of these categories that you could think of, like rock, jazz, country, disco, hip-hop, whatever. All those are fairly narrow historically. Because think about it, the history of rock, how far back does that go? The 1950s? The history of hip-hop, maybe back to the 1980s, rap and hip-hop. But quote-unquote classical music goes back at least to the early Middle Ages. The earliest type of music we're going to be looking at in detail is Gregorian chant, which would be classified as classical music, right? And that stuff goes back to the first, well, technically, I guess Gregorian, Pope Gregory was Pope in the 6th century AD. So all the way from the early Middle Ages through these various different eras, so many different types of music in there. It's so broad that it's really unfair. It doesn't do it justice to categorize it and say all of this is classical. Because you've got purely vocal, purely instrumental, a mix of vocal and instrumental. You have pieces by some composers, like maybe a Chopin prelude that's only 25 seconds long. And then you might have a Mahler symphony, which is almost 2 hours long, or an opera by Puccini, which is 3 hours long, right? So there's such wide variety within classical music because it's, everything from, again, Gregorian chant in the Middle Ages to a film score that was written yesterday. All of that is classical. It's way too broad. In addition, by the way, the word classical has a specific meaning within the world of classical music, because as we will see, we'll get to the classical era, which is a specific era going from about 1750 to 1820. This is the time of Haydn, Mozart, and Beethoven. So even within classical music, there are some composers which are classical composers, and then other composers which you might have thought were classical composers, like J.S. Bach, or Brahms or Tchaikovsky, who are not classical composers. Bach was a Baroque composer, with at least using this terminology we've come up with. Brahms and Tchaikovsky were Romantic composers. So the word classical is kind of a loaded term. We will use it. It's kind of unavoidable. But just so you know, for now, what we're talking about, Western art music, as opposed to music of other cultures, which are certainly worthy and great music. It's just that we don't have the time and the space for them here. Same thing with popular music. It's not that I have anything against popular music, but for one thing, you probably know more about popular music. I know at least as much as I do. So what's the point of teaching you something that you already know about? You probably know much less about quote-unquote classical music, so maybe more useful to teach you about that stuff. By the way, we also have other classes here at LHU for world music, music of different cultures, and popular jazz, other contemporary genres, which you can check out. But, by the way, it says here, provide an overview of Western art music from the medieval through the Romantic eras, basically up to the 19th century. That's where we're going to stop. We're going to run out of time in the mid-19th century, 1800s. And the historical, philosophical, and aesthetic context within which this music was composed. So it's going to be more than just the music. At least once we get out of this first unit on the elements of music, then we're going to look at these different historical periods. And we're going to have an exam on each historical period. And we're not only going to look at the music of those historical periods, we have to understand a little bit about the culture that produced it. Because music is not produced in a vacuum. It doesn't just appear. It is a product of a certain culture, which has certain modes of thinking or sets of beliefs, often perhaps rooted in religion or in other different kinds of modes of thought or cultural implications. So we're going to look at that as well. There's no point trying to understand music without understanding a little bit of the history and the culture that produced it. Now, the book does get into some of this. At the beginning of each of the different chapters on the different eras, there's like a page or two of historical context, and I might get into it even a little bit more in the lectures. And at this point, you might be wondering, well, how much of that's going to be on the test? There's going to be some of that on the test, because as I said, it is important. But after all, this is a music class. So on any given test, and all of my tests, by the way, are 50 questions, multiple choice. If there's 50 questions on, let's say, the Baroque era, maybe 8 or 10 of them might have more to do with the historical context, maybe less, I don't know. But most of them will be about music directly, and only a few of them will be about the cultural, historical stuff completely separate from music. But you don't know exactly which questions I'm going to ask, so that doesn't mean that you can just kind of gloss over the historical, cultural stuff. It's still important. By the way, the way that I teach this stuff, and I'm going to make this analogy over and over again, I try and present each of these different eras, each of these different units as sort of like a big picture, right? It's important for you to learn in this way, I think. This is the way that works best. And unfortunately, this is not something that's emphasized very often, I think, at least in my experience, in the way that students have learned how to learn. They learn instead by trying to memorize little individual jigsaw puzzle pieces without seeing how they fit together and how they form a big picture. And instead of trying to tie everything together in one big picture that has a frame, right, and has a background and has a foreground, right, where certain elements are perhaps more important, certain are less important, but are nonetheless part of the background. You have a frame that kind of ties it all together. You might have a title to the picture, which helps to tell you something about the contents of the picture. All that, if you think in terms of pictures, And at each fact that I give you, each individual term or piece of information, it's a piece of the puzzle, but make sure it gets plugged into the puzzle, because you won't really understand that piece unless you understand how it relates to other pieces. It's this sort of matrix of pieces which give each individual piece meaning and significance, because they all plug into a big picture. If you try right from the beginning to learn in this way, and it might be very different from the way that you've learned previously, if you try and learn not just in this class, but in all of your classes, and if you think about it in terms of putting together a big picture, so that by the time you are getting ready for the test, you've been working on your jigsaw puzzle for a while now. These things take time, right? And you've been fitting the pieces together, and the big picture is coming into view, and you can point to any one of the different places on the picture and understand how it relates to the other places, right? I'll talk a little bit more about learning itself. I'll probably have a few extra lectures that are not even about music, but about learning, how to learn effectively, because I think this is I see it as an important part of my mission as a teacher. I think it's more important that you guys leave here learning, having learned how to learn effectively. Because if you can learn how to learn, you can learn anything. Right? And that's more important than just learning about music. Of course, I'm here to teach music, and I will, but along the way, I'm going to give you some lessons on how to learn. Right? So try it my way, or at least take it into consideration, and I think things might go better for you. Another big part of learning, by the way, is communication, keeping in contact with me. If you ever don't understand something that you're reading in the book, something I've said in the lecture, something just goes like, I don't get what he said, and maybe you rewind the lecture and you still don't get it, or you reread the book and you still don't get it, reach out to me immediately. Don't even let a second pass. Reach out to me immediately and ask me to explain. And I will do my best to explain to you. And if my explanation isn't good enough, ask me again. Say, I still don't understand. Could you... Don't ever feel dumb for asking a question. That's what we're here for. You're here to ask questions. I'm here to answer them. All right? So don't ever feel shy about that. Please go ahead. I like to get questions from students. Okay. I've done a lot of talking, and I'm only this far into the syllabus, so let me keep going. So what are your responsibilities? You are responsible for material presented in class lectures and listening/reading assignments. It is expected that you will read any material for the day assigned before coming to class. Now, you're not really coming to class, but... so I'm going to assign reading. I'm going to assign listening. I'm going to assign lectures. I expect that you're going to do them. I'm not going to check off and see that you did them or not and grade you accordingly, right? The way that I check is I give you a test, and it'll probably become pretty clear if you've been, number one, actually watching the lectures and actually reading the book, and and more importantly, not just reading and watching, because remember, reading and watching are just means to an end. We need to understand the lectures and the reading. So you have to read, listen, and understand. The understanding is tricky, but I'm here to help you with that. The reading and the listening you certainly can do. The understanding takes a little more work. But of course, the reading and listening, we're not doing it just to, run some words past our eyeballs. We're watching and reading to understand stuff about the material. It might be like a statement of the obvious, but I think a lot of people don't get that sometimes. So you're responsible for these reading assignments. You're responsible for the material. And it's best to just stay on top of that. If I assign some reading in the announcements on D2L, if I say, check out the next lecture, you should do that within a day or two, because there's going to be another lecture after that and another reading assignment. You don't want to get behind, because learning, there's another thing about learning, has to be done gradually. It's like putting together a jigsaw puzzle. Nobody can just do it all at once. It's like eating. You don't starve yourself for 2 weeks and then eat 2 weeks worth of food all at once to catch up on the eating that you didn't do. You would get sick, You eat a couple times a day, and you eat in small bites, and you chew and digest. And it's a process that takes time. Right? Do not expect to cram and still pass this class, to neglect the class for a couple weeks at a time, not watch the lectures, not read the book, and still do well. It's possible, but it's highly unlikely that you'll do well, right? Whether in this class or any other class. Unless your professor has made the class an easy A, in which case he doesn't really care if you learn or not, and it's just play acting, it's pretend learning. It's like you pretend to learn and they pretend to teach you and you get a pretend grade. But not what we're going to do here. Okay. What else? In order to do well in this class, you must attend lectures, read the book, and do the listening. You should not expect to, I've already said all that stuff. The syllabus, you should also hang on to the syllabus. You don't really need to hang on to it. You'll have in your email, you can scroll back and find it in the announcements. If you have a question about the class procedures and policies themselves, please just check the syllabus first. The answer is probably in there. If you don't see the answer in there, then certainly contact me. Here's one thing that's kind of important. Missed tests. So we are going to have certain test days, and those test days will be regular class days, which means for you either a Monday, Wednesday, or Friday. Right? It'll only be a Monday, Wednesday, or Friday. Because those are days that I know at least you have some time free because you have this class scheduled during that time. Now, I am going to leave the test open all day on whatever day it is, and you will have 50 minutes to take the test. You'll have to log on at some time during that day, and you'll have 50 minutes to take the test. If something happens and you cannot take the test on a given day, well, we have a procedure for that. There are two possibilities. Either you cannot take the test on a given day because there's some conflict that you know about in advance. Like, oh, wait a minute, my sister's getting married on that day. I can't possibly take that test. Okay, so if you know about it in advance, as soon as you know about the conflict, all you need to do is contact me and we can easily set up another time, another day. And by the way, I should have said already, the tests are not going to be, the dates to the tests are not absolutely fixed. They are roughly every 3 weeks, but I leave myself a little bit of wiggle room in case stuff happens. It might be going a little faster here, a little slower there, might need a little more time. So instead what I do is I will announce on D2L, beginning at least a week in advance. I will post an announcement saying, be prepared for your next test a week from today, or a week from this coming Wednesday, or whatever. And I will remind in subsequent announcements prior to the test, I will mention the test, in case you first missed it that first time. I'll remind you several times, right? So if you're logging on to D2L and checking the announcements like you're supposed to, you'll have no problem knowing when the tests are, right? Now, if you email me and say, when's the next test? I'm going to say, log on to D2L and you'll find out, because that's what you're supposed to be doing. I'm going to communicate with you all primarily through D2L, not through email, right? So you have to take the initiative to log on to D2L and everything will be there for you. So let's say I've announced the next test date and you realize your sister's getting married that day, or any other thing, that's as long as it's a serious thing. Oh, I can't do it that day. You let me know as soon as you know there's a conflict. We work out an alternate time or day and no problem. Now, what if something happens on the test day itself? You slip and fall or break your neck or whatever. God forbid it won't be something that dramatic, but something serious happens. It's not like you woke up with the sniffles. Something serious enough that there would be like documentation of it, right? Like, something where some grown-up has written a note saying so-and-so, broke their leg or, had COVID or, had a court date or mother is in the hospital, something like that is serious. It can't just be a trivial thing. But if it's a serious thing that you didn't know about in advance, it's kind of like an emergency, we can deal with that too. All you have to do is send me an email within 24 hours of the test day itself. So let's say the test was on a Friday. Stuff happens and you couldn't take it. You knew there was a test, but you couldn't take it and things were hectic. Just email me within 24 hours after that test day and say, Dr. Curtin, I'm sorry, I couldn't take the test. I have a good reason. I have a note from some official person explaining why. I have documentation. Can we find another time for the test? And I'll say, sure, that's fine. Here's where the problem happens. When someone doesn't take the test, and I don't hear about it for like days afterwards, like, I guess there was a test last week. I missed it. Can I take it? No, you cannot in that case. Right? So just so we understand, there is a procedure for making up tests, but you have to be kind of on the ball. You have to either let me know if it's something you know about in advance, or let me know within 24 hours if it's a surprise, something unexpected. Otherwise, no, there is no making up tests. And there is no extra credit. I don't believe in the concept of extra credit. So just know right off the bat, there's not going to be any possibility for extra credit no matter what. Okay. Now, in this version of the syllabus, again, this is from my regular face-to-face class, and there's some stuff in here about laptop computers are not allowed in class, and you must put your phone away and stuff like that. Now, there's a thing in here on cheating. Of course, cheating is wrong. It's bad. Don't do it. Now, in this class, all of the tests are going to be open book, open notes. Right? And normally I don't do that, but I figure it's an online class. Probably people would be doing that anyway. So I don't want to punish the people who would be honest and not use their book if it was if it was official policy that you can't use your book, but I can't see into everybody's house, I can't, or your dorm room, wherever you are. So even though this kind of goes against my principles, it's open book for everybody, right? Or open notes. You can have your notebook open. However, you may not collaborate. Your test must be your own effort. Can't cooperate with somebody else. And there are ways of telling, which I'm not going to tell you about, but there are ways that I can tell whether you collaborate with someone else or not. So I just urge you not to do that. It's really unnecessary anyway. The tests are open book. I think you are capable of passing an open book multiple choice test with a little bit of work over a period of 2 or 3 weeks trying to understand the material. Right? So it's really unnecessary, and it's dishonest, and it's just not wise. You don't want to risk your academic career over something like that. Okay, so that's all I'm going to say about that. Now, it says here, I will return your tests and go over them in detail in the class period immediately following each test. So what I'm going to do, when we take a test, the very next video lecture, which will probably appear the next day or the day after, I will go over the test in detail, every single question. Right? And the purpose of that is not just to sort of relive a bad experience, but so that you can learn from this test about how you might be able to improve your performance on the next test. Right? And in the end, the way that your grade is figured is we take 5 tests. There's no other work. Yes, I assign reading and listening, but I don't quiz you on it. I don't make you write papers on it. Your entire grade is based on these 5 tests. What I will do at the end of the semester is I will look at these 5 grades. Whichever one is lowest, I will drop that grade. I will average the other 4 grades, your 4 highest grades, and that will be your final grade for the class. What happens if you miss a test? What happens if you're one of those people, you just completely missed one and you didn't get back to me in 24 hours and it's a 0? Actually, all is not lost in that case, because that could be your lowest test grade. In fact, it will be your lowest test grade as long as you don't get any other zeros on any tests, right? So that's how it works. It's very straightforward. The final exam is just the last test. It's not cumulative. It doesn't count any more than the other tests, right? All the tests count the same. All right, there's a bit in here about students with disabilities who are, of course, encouraged to discuss requests for reasonable accommodations. If this pertains to you, you've probably already registered with the Office of Disability Services, and there would be documentation. And all you have to do is, in advance of the test, like, let's say a week before, just send me an email and remind me, hey, Dr. Hurton, I have, this accommodation. Could we do this or that? Extra time, something like that. And I would be happy to do that. Okay, and the back part of this version of the syllabus, anyway, just gives kind of a rough overview of which units we will be looking at on, a rough schedule, week 1, week 2, not day by day. I'm not going to get that specific. But remember, there's 5 units and roughly 3 weeks per each unit. And then finally, there's this bit here on course goals and outcomes, which is one of these things that the administration says you must have on your syllabus, course goals and outcomes. Well, the goal of this course is for you to learn the material outlined above, obviously. The material which is described at the purposes of the course. The purpose of the course is to develop an understanding of the basic elements of music and an overview of Western art music, blah, blah, blah. That's our goal. The outcome, well, that's on you, right? The outcome is generated by you. It's going to differ from one person to the next. It depends on how willing and able you are to learn. And it's not necessarily based on effort either, I feel like I should say. Now, here's what I said. I said the outcome, whether or not you actually learn anything, will vary from one student to another and will depend on each individual student's willingness and ability to attend and listen to the lectures, read the textbook, listen to the listening tracks, ask questions in class, and see me for extra help outside of class when necessary. Your grade is based solely on your mastery of the material, not on attendance, on effort, on extra credit, or any other factors. Now, here's what I mean by effort does not count. You will probably need to put in some effort, and probably the case that the more effort you put in, the better grade you'll get. But it's not effort alone which attains results. What I grade is based on results. And the reason I say that, again, it kind of goes back to the stuff that I'm talking about, methods of learning. There are methods of learning which might require great effort, but do not produce all that great results. It's like anything else, You've probably seen people who are not that great of an athlete, like myself, who someone might put in an awful lot of effort, is out there huffing and puffing, but other people are easily beating him without breaking a sweat, all right? So it's not effort. There's, although, of course, you can't be a great athlete without effort, all right? There has to be a method, I think, a method that gets results. Effort in itself does not necessarily get results, but a good method, and I'm going to try again and teach you some good methods of learning along the way. I'm going to try and teach as effectively as I can so that you learn effectively. But I think also this is a good place to point out that teaching and learning are two different things. And just because there is teaching going on at one end doesn't necessarily mean that there's learning going on at the other end. And I guess the reverse is possible too. You could learn things without necessarily having anyone teach them to you. You could learn by observing yourself, or you could learn by reading in a book. I guess the author of the book would be the teacher in that case, but it's certainly possible to have learning without teaching. And it's definitely possible to have teaching without learning for at least two reasons. Maybe the teacher is teaching, but he's not teaching very well, and the students aren't learning. Or maybe the teacher is teaching well, but the students aren't learning because they're either not good learners or they're not interested in learning, really. They're just sitting there for some other reason, right? So teaching and learning are very complex things, but there are two parties involved, at least. Right? In this situation, we have a teacher, me, and we have learners, you. Right? My responsibility is to teach, and I'm going to do the best I possibly can. I've been doing this for 25 years now, and I think I'm pretty good at it. I definitely have practice at it, and I've had practice at being a learner before this, because I went to school for 23 years before I started doing this. 23 years. K through 12, and then 5 years of undergraduate, because I was a double major, English and music. And then 2 years for my master's degree, 3 years for my doctoral degree. So I did an awful lot of learning, have a lot of experience there too. And then I turned around and became a teacher. So I've been doing that ever since. I have some definite ideas about teaching and learning. The teaching part is definitely my responsibility. The learning part is your responsibility. And so you have to take responsibility for your own learning, for your own education. This education is for your benefit, not for mine, right? And so you have to take the initiative. And again, that might mean just something as simple as sending me an email, the equivalent of raising your hand, when you don't understand something and you need it explained better. And then it's back on me as the teacher to explain it better, right? But I can't know that you don't understand something unless you take the initiative and let me know. And in my 25 years, and the reason I emphasize this so much, in my 25 years as a college professor, and again, I like to level with my students, tell them the truth, tell them what they're in for, give them the benefit of my experience, such as it is. The single biggest weakness, I guess, that I've seen, or problem that I've seen with the students that I've had is their passivity, meaning their unwillingness, at least so as far as I can tell, unwillingness, inability, whatever, to take responsibility for their own education and take the initiative. Right? And I have my own ideas about why this is, which I'm not going to get into, but it's not because people are dumb or they're lazy, right, that they don't do well very often in college. It's because they don't take the initiative or take responsibility. And even that might not necessarily be their fault because of the way they've been conditioned by the K through 12 system, which brought them up to this point, right? And maybe they're expecting that college is just going to be like grades 13 through 16 or whatever, right? And it might be, but it might not be, especially in my class, right? So just be prepared to take some responsibility for your own education. If you do that, you will have, I think, very good experience in this class and in all your classes, right? So again, I will be talking a bit about learning as a separate subject, and I might have some lectures on the YouTube channel that just say on learning. And that's just kind of like optional extra stuff. That's not stuff that's going to be on the exam. That's just extra stuff to help you develop better techniques of learning that will help you in this class and all other classes. Okay, why don't we leave it there for now? And for next time, remember, your assignment is very simple. Write down your own definition of the word music off the top of your head, not consulting a dictionary or whatever. And don't worry, it's not going to be graded. Write it down or type it, send it to me in an email, and that's where we will begin our next lecture. Till next time, See ya.